My name is Margaret Lane, and I built this house with nothing but a stubborn heart and 2 tired hands. It took me 27 years to pay it off, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. It wasn't perfect. The roof leaked when it rained. The pipes moaned in winter. But it was the one place in this world that had my fingerprints on every wall. When my husband, Robert, was still alive, we used to call it our little miracle. He laid the tiles himself, crooked as they were, and I painted the kitchen yellow because I wanted it to look like sunlight even when life got dark. That's what the house meant to us. Warmth, even when there wasn't much to be warm about. We had one child, Thomas. Smart, funny, impatient. The kind of boy who always wanted more than what the world gave him. I used to watch him run down that front path with his backpack bouncing and think, he's going to be someone. And he was, just not the someone I expected. After Robert died, the house went quiet, too quiet. The clock ticked louder, the air felt heavier, and the shadows stayed longer. Thomas started visiting less, always busy with something, work, bills, life. I told myself that's what grown children do. They drift away, and you cheer for them from far behind. But loneliness has a way of whispering things into your heart. And when he finally came back, I mistook guilt for love. It was last summer. Thomas showed up at my door with flowers and an apology. Said he'd lost his apartment after a bad breakup, that he just needed a little time to get things straight. He smiled the same way he did when he was 8 and wanted dessert before dinner. And like always, I said yes. He moved back in. At first, it felt good. Someone else at the table, a voice in the house, laughter in the kitchen again. He fixed the porch steps, brought groceries, even surprised me with a new phone. He called me Mama again, something he hadn't done in years. And I believed we were healing. That's the thing about mothers. We mistake comfort for change. A month later, he started talking about streamlining finances. Said joint ownership would make it easier for him to help me. He brought in a folder one night, full of paperwork and polite reassurances. It's just your name and mine together, he said. So if anything ever happens, I can step in fast. I laughed and told him, nothing's happening. He smiled and said, it's just good sense, Mom. And I signed. I didn't even read the fine print. When you trust someone completely, the details don't matter. Until they're all that does. A few weeks later, I started feeling dizzy, short of breath. The doctor said it was my heart. I told him it was just age. He told me it was exhaustion. They admitted me overnight for observation. I remember the smell of bleach and the hum of fluorescent lights. I remember Thomas sitting by my bed, holding my hand. He said, "Don't you worry, Mama. I'll take care of everything at home." I smiled, because what else can a mother do but believe? The next week turned into 2. Thomas stopped visiting as often. He said work was hectic, that he'd be back soon. When I called, sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. The world shrank to the size of a hospital room and a phone that never rang long enough. One evening, a hospital administrator came by. She asked if my address had changed. I frowned and said no. She hesitated. "It shows your property was recently transferred to a new owner." she said gently. I laughed. There must be a mistake. She nodded, that polite nod people use when they already know the truth you don't want to hear. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks until morning. I told myself Thomas would never do that, and for a few more hours I still believed it. The day I was discharged, the nurse wheeled me out into the sunlight. I clutched my purse, my heart medicine, and my hope. I called Thomas from the parking lot, voicemail, so I left a message. Tommy, I'm coming home. I can't wait to sit on the porch again. I said it smiling, because I didn't know that home, my porch, my house, my miracle, was already gone. They say coming home after the hospital feels like coming back to life, but no one tells you what it feels like when home is gone. The taxi pulled up to my street just after noon. The trees were heavy with summer, sunlight bouncing off the pavement. For a moment, I almost forgot the beeping machines, the endless nights of alarms and whispered nurses. I was going home, to the yellow kitchen, the chipped mailbox, the smell of Robert's old aftershave still faint in the hall. But when the car stopped, I knew something was wrong. There were boxes on the porch, new flower pots by the door, and curtains I didn't own. A young woman opened the front door before I could even knock. She smiled like she'd been expecting someone else. "Hi, can I help you?" she said. I just stood there, clutching my hospital discharge papers, like they were proof I still existed. "I live here," I said softly. "This is my home." She frowned, confused. "I think you have the wrong address. We moved in last week." I felt my throat close. "No," I whispered. "This is 814 Meadow Lane. This is my house." A man came to the door. Her husband, I suppose. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd seen a ghost. He held out a document. It was the deed. And there, printed neatly in black ink, was Thomas Lane's signature. "We bought it from your son," the man said gently. "I'm sorry, we didn't know." My knees gave out before my heart could. The woman helped me sit on the porch, my porch, and asked if I wanted a glass of water. I wanted to tell her to leave, to get off my property, but I couldn't even breathe. All I could see were the boxes, the furniture through the window, the pictures of their family already on my walls. It was like watching someone live inside your skin. Later, the neighbors came over. Mrs. Grant from next door knelt beside me, her face pale. "Margaret," she whispered, "I thought you moved. Your son said you sold the place." I shook my head. He told me he was taking care of it. She looked down. He took care of it all right. I called him, straight to voicemail, once, twice, 10 times, nothing. I sat there until the street lights came on, too weak to move, too shocked to cry. The new couple offered to drive me somewhere. I said I was fine. I wasn't. Betrayal. That night, I checked into a cheap motel near the highway. The walls smelled like cigarettes and lemon cleaner. I lay on the bed, holding my old house keys. They didn't open anything anymore. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely homeless. Not because I had nowhere to go, but because the only place that ever knew me was now someone else's. The next morning, I went to the bank. The teller looked at me like I was a problem to solve. I asked to see my account. She clicked through her computer and frowned. Mrs. Lane, the sale was finalized 2 weeks ago. The proceeds were transferred to your son's account. I stared at her. My son? She nodded. All signatures are verified. My, I wanted to scream that I hadn't signed anything, that I was in a hospital bed with IV tubes in my arm. But the words just fell apart before they reached my mouth, because once the papers say it's true, no one cares about what's real. I went to the police. The officer behind the desk didn't even look up when I spoke. I told him my son had sold my home without my consent. He asked if my name was still on the title. It was, I said. Was? He sighed. Then it's a civil issue, ma'am. You'll need to talk to an attorney. I wanted to ask him if Betrayal had a department, if there was somewhere a mother could go to report a broken heart. But I didn't. I just thanked him and left. I stayed with a friend from church, Linda, who had a spare room that smelled of lavender and mercy. She listened while I told her everything. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time before saying, "You know, Margaret, I always liked Thomas. I never thought he had this in him." I smiled bitterly. Neither did I. Kwame. Days turned into weeks. No word from him. No explanation. Just silence. I saw his name once, in a Facebook post, a new car, a smiling photo with the caption, "Finally debt-free and starting over." I stared at it for so long I memorized the pixels. Then I closed the phone and turned it face down. It's strange, the way love can die without sound. You think it'll shatter like glass, but it doesn't. It just fades. One afternoon, I went back to the street. I told myself it was to see the roses I planted by the mailbox. They were still there, growing wild, untended, beautiful. The couple was outside painting the fence white. They waved. I waved back. Then I turned and walked away. That was the day I realized I couldn't get my house back. But I could get myself back, one piece at a time. Later that night, I sat in Linda's kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold, staring at the steam that wasn't there. I thought of Robert, of how proud he was when we finished paying off the house. I whispered, "I lost it, Rob. I lost what we built." And in the quiet that followed, I almost heard him say, "You didn't lose it, Maggie. He did." I still sleep with the keys under my pillow. They don't open anything anymore, but they remind me of who I was and what no one can sell, no matter how hard they try. My name, my heart, and the truth. When someone steals from you, you lose money. When your own child steals from you, you lose the meaning of home. Tetravidan. A month passed before I found the strength to look at the papers again. The deed, the bank statement, the empty account, each one felt like a wound that wouldn't close. Linda told me to let it go. But I couldn't. You don't let go of something that took your whole life to build. So I went looking for help. Tekia, the first lawyer I met, smiled too easily. He looked at the papers, sighed, and said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lane. This happens more often than you'd think, but proving fraud between family members, that's messy." I told him I didn't care about messy. I cared about justice. He said justice would cost me $10,000 in fees. I thanked him and walked out. The world loves money more than truth. A week later, I found Angela Reyes, a legal aid attorney with tired eyes and a kind voice. She read everything, slowly, carefully. When she finished, she said, "You were hospitalized on the day this was signed." I nodded. She looked at me. "Then let's make that the beginning of your case." It was the first time someone had said your case instead of your problem. I felt the smallest flicker of something I hadn't felt in months, maybe hope. Angela helped me file the report. Forgery, real estate fraud. We gathered every proof, hospital records, pharmacy receipts, phone logs, every line that proved I was too sick to hold a pen. When we submitted the complaint, the clerk looked at me like I was wasting time. She asked, "Do you have any witnesses?" I said, "Only a mother's memory." She didn't write that part down. A few days later, Angela called. "They'll investigate," she said, "but it might take time." "How long?" I asked. "As long as the truth takes to matter." I hung up, walked to the window, and watched the rain trace down the glass. Outside, the world kept moving, people going home, closing doors, turning lights on. And I thought, what do you do when your home has someone else's laughter in it? 2 months passed before they called me back. The police had located Thomas. He was living in a rented condo across town. New car, new clothes, new girlfriend, no sign of remorse. Angela and I drove there together. When he opened the door, he froze, like guilt wasn't expecting company. He smiled nervously. "Mama, you look better." I said nothing. He invited us in. His living room was spotless, modern, bright, expensive. He poured coffee like we were strangers. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd understand. I just needed a fresh start." I asked, "So you sold mine?" He looked down. "It was just a house, Mom," I whispered. "No, Thomas, it was me." He tried to justify it. Debt, desperation, opportunity. Words that sound like excuses when they come from your own child. Finally, I stood up and said, "You took my roof. You don't get to take my dignity too." And I walked out. He didn't follow. The court date came 3 months later. The courthouse smelled like old paper and colder memories. I sat behind the plaintiff's table, Angela beside me. Thomas walked in, wearing a new suit and the same old arrogance. He didn't look at me once. The judge asked him why he sold the house. He said, "She wanted me to have it. She just doesn't remember." Angela stood and handed over my hospital records. She spoke slowly, every word sharp enough to cut glass. "Your Honor, Mrs. Lane was under medical care when these signatures were made. She couldn't walk. She couldn't even hold a pen. But her name walked itself into a real estate office that day." The courtroom went silent. Thomas stared at the floor. The judge took a long breath and said, "This court finds sufficient evidence of fraud and forgery. The property sale is voided. Restitution is ordered." He banged the gavel. Just like that, it was over. Or maybe it was just beginning. When we left the courthouse, Angela smiled for the first time. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "No, I just survived it." She handed me the final document, the ruling with my name restored. It felt lighter than the guilt I'd carried for months. I didn't cry. Tears are for things that still matter. This was something else, relief without joy. That night, I went to see my old house one last time. The new owners had repainted the front door blue, a different car in the driveway, a child's bicycle near the porch. The roses were still blooming, though. The ones I planted for Robert the year he died. They'd outlived everything. I stood there under the streetlight, breathing in the smell of earth and loss. And for the first time, I didn't wish I could go back, because sometimes the only way home is forward. Angela told me I'd receive compensation, money from the restitution order. I told her I didn't want it. Money can buy many things, but it can't buy back what love takes when it leaves. Instead, I asked her to donate part of it to a shelter that helps elderly victims of fraud. She agreed. That night, before bed, I whispered a prayer. Thank you, Lord, for showing me that justice isn't revenge. It's remembering who I am. Tituai, I slept through the night for the first time in a year. And when I woke up, the sun felt new again. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing myself. I thought winning in court would feel like peace, but it didn't. It just felt quiet, like standing in an empty church after the choir's gone home. A month after the verdict, I received the restitution check, $68,000. Not nearly what the house was worth, but enough to start over. I held it in my hand for a long time, tracing the numbers with my finger. It didn't feel like money, it felt like ashes, what's left after you've burned everything you love to stay warm. I tore it in half and handed it to Angela, my lawyer. Use it for someone else, I said. Someone like me. She hesitated, then smiled softly. You sure? I nodded, because I didn't need money. I needed meaning. I found a small apartment near the old hospital where I used to work. Nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, 1 window, a view of the parking lot. But when the sunlight hit that window in the morning, it felt like grace. I painted the kitchen the same shade of yellow as the old house. Robert would have liked that. He always said yellow made sad things seem honest. Tanapia, I started volunteering at a local senior center, helping others fill out forms, protect their property, read the small print they never used to notice. They called me Ms. Margaret, the lady who lost her home. I didn't correct them, because what I really lost wasn't the house. It was the illusion that love couldn't hurt me. And that's the kind of loss that makes you wiser, not weaker. Sometimes I see mothers come in with sons who remind me of Thomas. Kind smiles, empty eyes. They ask for help, and I help them. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about refusing to carry their sin on your back anymore. Last winter, Thomas called me. His voice was smaller somehow. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I asked, "Do you have somewhere to stay?" He said no. I said, "There's a shelter 2 blocks from my church. Tell them your name. They'll help." He paused. "Can I come home?" And I told him the truth. I don't live there anymore. He cried, and when the line went silent, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. One morning in early spring, I walked to the community garden behind the senior center. I planted a small oak sapling, A man asked what it was for. I told him, for a home that can't be sold. He didn't understand. That was fine. Not everything real needs explaining. Now, every Sunday, I sit on the same park bench after church, watching the sun move across the sky, feeling the wind through my hair. Sometimes I think about the old house, the sound of rain on the roof, the smell of cinnamon from the kitchen. And then I think, I built that once, and I can build peace again. Home isn't a building. It isn't walls or windows or the color of paint. It's the place inside you where forgiveness finally takes root. It's the quiet after the storm, the voice that says, "You're safe now." That's what I found. Not revenge, not justice, just peace, the kind that stays. Fitania, when I close my eyes now, I see Robert on the porch, smiling, the wind moving through the roses we planted together. I whisper, I came home, Rob, not to the house, but to myself. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.